I'd like to really, I'm very happy now to introduce Richard Reschen, who is the Senior Tech Transfer Manager in Licensing and Venture in the Licensing and Ventures Group here at Oxford University, and I think he's going to reveal some of the things that actually emerged in the last talk about the public-private thing. Maybe you are not.
Possibly, yeah. I'm a senior manager, not the senior manager. Thank you. It's very flattering. I hope I'll get promoted when I get back.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks. Just to start briefly, actually, so we're now called Oxford University Innovation, not ISIS Innovation, because some of our colleagues actually had some problems going through US customs, saying they were working for ISIS. So we're now more closely associated with the university. So my talk is entitled Commercialising University Technologies for Clinical Benefit. And I wanted almost to give kind of like a non-academic kind of whistle-stop tour through technology transfer and the view as we see it at the moment. And I think very interesting to hear all the different perspectives from the talks later on today. So just by way of background, Oxford University Innovation, the Technology Transfer Office of the University of Oxford. So we help commercialise research arising from the university. My background, so I've been at OUI for about 6 years. I've done quite a few license deals with industry for technologies as varied as, say, acute myeloid leukemia, novel types of microscopes, various different things. Set up several new spin-out companies, quite a few in the last year or two, actually. And I've also had stints in finance and management consultancy. And my background actually is in biology, my original PhD. So what am I going to talk about? So as I've said, it's going to be more of a technology transfer practitioner's viewpoint. To start with a brief introduction, I suppose, not really needed for this audience, but obviously about the cost of drug development, a little bit of the rationale for patents in this area, moving on to how vital UK university research is to generate new treatments and diagnostics. Say a little bit about how patent applications can be important tools for us in commercialising this research, though not always. And then I think just to finish on a few actual examples of some technologies that are actually spun out of Oxford and that are already providing some clinical benefit. So firstly, I suppose drug development is quite expensive. This is one of the famous figures quoted by the Tufts Centre for kind of drug research. I think we could argue probably about this cost. They say that a new drug costs $2.5 billion to develop, of which about half is out-of-pocket cost. The other part is the amount that investors forego in terms of putting that money in. They could have obviously put their money in somewhere else. I think obviously this figure is quite controversial. I think one could argue what the real figure is. It could be a lot lower, and I think it depends a lot on the I suppose the particular company, the particular drug, the therapy area, etc., etc. So I think that is quite controversial, but I think we can all agree that drug development is quite expensive. And why is that? Well, it's obviously very risky, very high attrition rates. So I've just taken this slide here from Lonza, which is a drug discovery company, and if we look down at the third row, we can see obviously that there's a very high probability of attrition as we go from very early stage kind of basic research and target discovery all the way through to clinical trials, for example, phase 2, phase 3. So obviously the reason for patents, I suppose, in this area, or the theoretical idea, is that patents are a bargain between the state and inventors. You get your monopoly, and it gives companies to invest in an incentive to invest in this quite risky area. Of course, there's lots of problems with this system. Might not be many patent years left of life on a drug when it comes to market, maybe only a few. Companies are often forced to spend large amounts on marketing to exploit the few years of patent life they have before the drug goes off patent and generic competition arises. And of course, other things like publication of details on the patents may allow other companies to kind of assert the innovators and generate Me Too drugs. So this is the system that we work with, I suppose, in technology transfer using patents. It's not perfect, but it's the current system. But it's interesting, I think, to hear the other talks and the other ideas about ways the system might be improved or be changed. So I entitled my talk, Commercialising University Technologies for Clinical Benefit. So just to say, what do I really mean by clinical benefit? And I think the introduction there was very drug-centric, but of course it's not all about drugs. Medical software, for example, can offer significant clinical benefit. And I'll mention an example later, new diagnostics for stratifying patients, or for example, this insulin pump here, which allows you to replace manual injections and have a more regular kind of glucose profile. So there are a whole range of different technologies arising from university research that can potentially deliver clinical benefit. So I wanted next to say a little bit just about the importance of UK university research. So this slide just shows the overall kind of funding landscape for UK science. Quite helpfully, universities are there in the middle. You can see a lot of research funding comes from the government, also from private investment, from charities such as the Wellcome Trust. And if we move on to looking at UK university research income, it's around £7.9 billion a year. I couldn't find the exact figure for the amount spent on life science or medical research, but it's certainly a substantial proportion of that total. So, and if we look at the importance of UK research, the UK obviously represents just 0.9% of the world's population, 3.2% of R&D expenditure, and 4.1% of the world's researchers. Yet we have almost 16% of the world's most highly cited articles. So we really punch well above our weight. And I think that's also showed by some other research impact measures. And a lot of this is obviously due to our leading universities, which really are kind of engines for future kind of clinical innovation. I noticed here my talk's quite Oxford-centric, so I've just thrown in a little picture of King's College Chapel there in Cambridge, just to add some weight, some balance to my talk. So in terms of outputs of UK universities, the Department of Business Innovation and Skills claim that universities contribute about £73 billion of output to the UK economy. They directly or indirectly employ 757,000 people. And in terms of, say, licensing income, universities generate £172 million of income from their licensed patents. And the Russell Group, so a group of 20 kind of leading research-intensive universities, the spinouts that they set up generate in excess of £644 million of turnover every year. And I think it's very obvious that UK universities are originators of a number of technologies with clinical benefit. These are just some actually quite old examples, the link between spina bifida and folic acid, the invention of the first portable defibrillator at Queen's University in Belfast, the invention by, I think, Ken Murray in Edinburgh of the first hepatitis B vaccine, and the list goes on. So a huge number of kind of innovations with clinical benefit have arisen from UK universities. So in terms of innovation from Oxford, Oxford's, I think, got one of probably the highest university research spend in the UK, about 612 million. The medical science division alone gets around £340 million of research income. And most universities have tech transfer offices. Oxford University Innovation, as mentioned, is the one for Oxford. And we, I think, probably one of the largest tech transfer offices, we set up about 26 new companies last year and secured £53 million in early stage funding, and I'll come on to that a little bit later. So this is just a few brief slides about OUI, just about our turnover. But it's interesting more, I think, to look at the number of disclosures that we're getting per year. So we had 558 new disclosures last year. We filed 142 patents. But this volume of disclosures means there's a lot of assessment we need to do when we get new inventions, particularly in the life science clinical area, as to, is it useful for us to file a patent? Is that going to help the commercialisation of the technology or potentially hinder it? And it's one of the issues I'll chat about a little bit later. So just an overview of what technology transfer is. Well, it's very straightforward here. This cartoon, it's obviously disclosure. We chat to our academics. We evaluate the draft paper they've come to us with, the technology, assess whether there's potential there to file IP on it, how far is it away from commercialization, etc. And then the two main methods by which we commercialize university research are either licensing, through a license deal, or through the formation of a new spin-out company. So one of the problems we face in technology transfer is that university research is obviously at a really early stage. So if we look at the classic drug development pipeline here, a lot of university research is way here on the left in the basic or early translational research phase. But commercial interest often comes after the so-called valley of death, to when you've got something that is ready for clinical development, ready for clinical trials. So we always have a kind of a difficulty of, should we patent or should we not patent? So the research is obviously at a really early stage, yet our academics want to publish it, and that's obviously the main thing that's important in academia. So on ours, as technology transfer managers, it forces us to a very early decision on patenting. So obviously publishing, if academics publish, that'll destroy the novelty and inventiveness, and so we need to make a decision, do we patent or not? Patents, of course, are expensive. I think I mentioned we had about 550 new disclosures a year. It can cost up to £40,000 or more to get a patent granted. We don't have an infinite patent budget, so we have to make quite tough choices about what we patent and when. And of course, if we don't patent a technology, perhaps then there may be no incentive in future for a company to invest in it if they have no kind of way of excluding others from that area. So the choice we have is between patent then publish or just publish. So some of the considerations we consider is, obviously, is the technology patentable? I mean, many types of technology are not patentable, as the audience is well aware. Is the technology likely to be of commercial interest? So we spend a lot of time actually assessing the market for the technology, the future roadmap, how it might be developed, and also how long will it take to get there, and can we actually get the technology to that stage? So is it worth us filing a patent and investing in that to actually then be able to get the technology to a stage where companies are likely to be of interest in it? Is the technology likely to be of clinical benefit? A lot of the technologies we work on are, though that's, I mean, not necessarily a priority in our assessment, but also will we get data within the first priority year? So we often get academics coming to us with very early stage disclosures with perhaps a really good concept and a little bit of early data, but we really need to get data within the first year in order to be able to later support the claims of our patent. And so one of the things we assess is, will we be able to get that data to actually make a patent have strength and kind of validity in future? So some more specific considerations in the life science. There are certain things we wouldn't consider patenting generally. Basic research with kind of no immediately obvious commercial or clear clinical benefits. It's obviously much better for the research to be published and scientists to continue work on it. Drug targets, it's often very difficult to patent drug targets because you can't really reach through to claim all chemical space that might hit a novel kind of drug target molecule. So it's often not very useful to patent them with certain exceptions. Long lists of biomarkers, e.g. from GWAS studies, very difficult to patent those, unless you can identify really just a few core preferred markers that might be useful. Minor improvements to existing technologies, and also repurposed drugs, so new uses of existing drugs. We found that those are not generally very commercially attractive unless they're administered via a different route of administration or a different dose, because otherwise doctors can just cross-prescribe the existing drug for the new indication. One thing that's also very important for us as a university is obviously ensuring that in any license deals we do that there are clauses around access to medicines for, say, developing countries, because what we do really is really about societal benefit. So in terms of commercializing technology, I said we either tend to license technology or form a spin-out. So which way do we go? Well, a lot depends on our academics' inventors' actual interests. So obviously license to an existing company. It can be good for technology at a high readiness level or with a very clear path forward. There's less input needed from the academic inventor and from ourselves. It may be the quickest route to market, but it really does depend on the technology and the company partner. In terms of a spin-out, these require a lot more effort from our academic inventors and from ourselves. We need to raise substantial investment, find management for the company, set up all the legal documents, etc. It can be really good for platform technology or groundbreaking ideas that require lots of investment to realize and don't necessarily have a straight path forward, but need a lot more kind of intensive research. And maybe a good example might be Oxford nanopore, so a totally new form of DNA sequencing that was discovered a few years ago using these bacterial nanopores. So a groundbreaking idea, but something that perhaps at the time companies wouldn't have necessarily been interested in licensing because it was way too far from the market. A spin-out was probably a better vehicle to get that technology developed. So I talked a bit before about the kind of the valley of death that we face in as technology transfer managers in trying to get early stage university technology to a stage at which it's of commercial interest. And one of the ways that we do that is through translational funding. So organisations such as the MRC and the Wellcome Trust have a range of programmes that academics can apply to kind of infuse their research with further funding specifically to take it towards the next step, at which point it might be ready to go into industry. The MRC here just shows in some graphs I found on their website. So actually 31% of active MRC research had a translational focus in 2015 to 16. And you can see the massive increase on the graph on the right in amounts of expenditure with a translational focus over the last 10 years or so. So it's a kind of an area of growing importance. And the MRC here quantifies some of their outputs themselves. So since 2008, one of their particular funding schemes, the Developmental Pathway Funding Scheme, projects funded by that have raised additional £100 million of financing via spin-out creation. They say that it's enabled 60 first-in-human clinical studies. And another program, the Confidence and Concept Scheme, has led to the formation of 16 new spin-out companies, for example. So the MRC see translational funding as being of real importance. Another way I think we can help bridge this gap is closer academic clinical connections. So a lot of hospitals and universities around the countries have partnered up. For example, there's collaboration here between the university and the Oxford NHS trusts. And more recently, the Department of Health has funded these more formal centres, so academic health science centres, which are really kind of bringing together universities and hospitals in a kind of interdisciplinary partnership to try and kind of bridge this gap and get the input of clinicians and researchers together to really develop technologies and get them to the clinic sooner. So some more recent developments. There's quite a few now interesting novel public-private partnerships which are helping to bridge this gap. So in Oxford we've got one called Lab 282, which is a £30 million pot of funding that's been created in a sense to help translate basic science discoveries into new therapies. And the idea is that Oxford has partnered with Biotech, which is a drug discovery company, and the money has come from OSI, Oxford Sciences Innovation, which is a venture investment company associated with Oxford. And essentially it uses the resources of Biotech to screen, say, drug targets discovered in academia, generate novel compounds, all the types of things that you might do in kind of early kind of translational to preclinical work. And the intention then is the technology will be licensed into a new spin-out vehicle, which will then be set up and funded and hopefully stand on its own 2 feet. Another program is Apollo Therapeutics, which has been set up by 3 other universities, Cambridge, UCL and Imperial, with 3 leading pharma companies, so AstraZeneca, J&J and GSK. And this is a £40 million fund, again to support this translational funding gap, where the resources of the pharma companies and the universities can be combined to actually take projects across this particular funding gap. So quite a kind of exciting new model from those universities. Another one that is particularly relevant for us here in Oxford is the kind of so-called university venture funds or patient capital. So it's known as patient capital because unlike most venture funds, Oxford Sciences Innovation takes a long-term view when it invests. So it expects that it's investing in university spin-out companies, but it knows that it's going to take a long while before the technology will actually get to market. So Oxford Sciences Innovation is a group essentially of venture capital investors that set up a £560 million fund solely to invest in Oxford spin-outs. So for us in a technology transfer office, it's been a huge help essentially in setting up new companies. So we set up, I think, 26 new companies last year, which is double the amount we normally would do. And I think had about £54 million in funding. And more than half of that went into life science or medical companies. And it's not just Oxford, other universities. Cambridge has got its own similar venture fund associated with it. And then, of course, there's things like Touchstone Innovations, which was formerly associated with Imperial. So these are really bringing a lot of kind of financial wherewithal to kind of actually develop early stage technologies. And a lot of the money is going into life science and medical ventures. So I thought now I'd just move on to a few brief examples of interesting kind of innovations that have come out of Oxford and some of the licenses and spin-out companies that we've done. So we do around 100 licenses a year. One of the examples here is Sonicade, which was a handheld monitor used to listen to the fetal heartbeat. It was licensed to actually a company in Cardiff, Huntley Healthcare. You can see some of the pictures of the device down there. This is an example of some actually non-patented technologies that have real clinical benefits. So clinical outcome assessments or patient-reported outcome measures are essentially questionnaires that are used and filled in by patients themselves, say following things like elective surgery. So the Oxford Hip Score, the Oxford Knee Score, have actually been used by the NHS since 2009 for the mandatory assessment of outcomes following hip and knee surgery. They're actually used by 300 other organisations around the world, and it's all based on just a copyrighted questionnaire, essentially, which is licensed for free for academic use, academic research, and also in the NHS, but then is licensed commercially to commercial companies such as pharma companies. So this is something that's already delivering real clinical benefit. Brainomix was a spin-out from Oxford University in 2013, with their eAspect software, which essentially enables a rapid and standardized assessment of stroke patient CT scans. So it almost takes the expertise of a really experienced clinician and applies it in the software, but such that you then get a standardized process. So every clinician that uses the software is getting the same results out, essentially. So this is already in use by various hospitals across Europe. Another recent spin-out is Organox. So they developed a device to actually keep donor organs useful for longer, so that it gives you more time to find a recipient, essentially. So you can see the machine here, it's quite complicated, but it actually maintains the organ in a viable state for a lot longer. So again, that's delivering, I think, real clinical benefit. And in 2015 already, the first liver transplants used this device before implantation into a recipient. Another recent spin-out is Vaxitech, which is founded on the expertise of Professors Adrian Hill and Sarah Gilbert in the Jenner Institute. And we helped them raise £10 million seed investment towards their goal of developing a universal flu vaccine, which is obviously, I think, something we'd all agree on is a really important thing that would offer real benefit to a large number of people in the future. And finally, I wanted to finish on a little video about Nightstar. Nightstar was a spin-out from University of Oxford here in 2014, funded by Syncona, the Wellcome Trust venture arm, with £40 million of funding. And it's developing new gene therapy treatments for retinal disorders, such as choroidemia, which is a form of inherited blindness that infects 1 in 50,000 people. And if this video works, I just want to show you a little slot from Sky News, which I think really illustrates the benefit that this technology is already having.
Jonathan Wyatt had given up all hope of ever reading again. He was just 20 when he was told he had a genetic disorder called choroideremia and he would slowly go blind. But for the first time, doctors have used gene therapy to correct a DNA defect inside his eye cells, dramatically improving his vision.
When I got home, I looked at Diana's mobile phone and I said, I can see the digits. I can see the digits. Hey, switch it on. Switch it on. And I said, I can see the menu panel.
The first 6 patients treated at the Oxford Eye Hospital were all able to see better in dim light. In 2, the effects have been described as dramatic. The scientists first modified a harmless virus to carry a working copy of a human gene that sufferers lack. They then used a fine needle to reach the back of the eye, where they inject the virus behind the retina. The virus then infected light-sensitive cells, releasing the gene, which started producing protein that helped to preserve vision.
Rather than taking a pill or proteins or taking tablets, we're actually correcting the disease at the genetic level. In other words, genetically modifying the patients who have the problem to put the gene back that's missing. Obviously, we're very excited because potentially gene replacement is a way of stopping the disease from starting in the first place, and we could genetically modify people to prevent them from getting the disease and hopefully prevent them from losing their sight.
Around 1,000 people in Britain suffer from choroideremia, but the same technique could treat far more common genetic causes of blindness, including age-related macular degeneration. Doctors are so excited by the results published in the Lancet Medical Journal that they've already started another trial. The procedure could be approved for more widespread use in as little as 5 years. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Right, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much.